Thanks so much, Tom and Amy, and thank you to the IWIB committee chairs for letting us join or kind of crash your meeting for this presentation. And thanks for joining me today, either live or via recording, to review these major WIOA projects taking place in program year 2021. So this presentation really is a chance for us to look forward together at the different required plans and reports and other projects that we're going to be working on together in one way or another over the next several months to a year. Okay. So our main objectives over the next 20 minutes or so really is to review what these activities are and excuse me, how we are going to go about collaborative engagement on these various projects. We'll look at a simple timeline of these activities. We're going to review some points where you all will be providing your input in the processes, and then we'll get into what the next steps actually are. So that's the plan for today. And just so we all know who is here today joining us, besides the normal members of this committee, we have IWIB members, including members of the executive committee, of course, and we also have required partners, including agency program directors and those involved in apprenticeship programming across the state as well. So again, thanks to everybody for being here for about a 20-minute presentation here that hopefully will help us all better understand what is in store regarding WIOA. So here we have some questions to kind of ask ourselves during this presentation and over the next several months as you see these processes begin that we're going to go over today. First of all, which of these activities am I going to be actively participating in is a big question. Which should I keep on my radar moving forward? What input can I provide, and when should I provide it? Those are the three main questions. So these will help us kind of get in the right frame of mind as we head into the new program year that just started this month. So now talking with the IWIB members now specifically, in terms of strategy and goal setting, you are at the beginning of these processes, the end of these processes, and you are integral to the benchmarks as well of all these processes and activities, especially regarding the Unified State Plan, modification, and the annual report submitted to DOL and the Illinois General Assembly at the end of the year. So you essentially, as we all know, set the strategy, and then we required partners that are here today largely act as the operators, implementing WIOA and adapting to the ever-changing, needs of the workforce. So I also wanted to make a point to say that these processes aren't occurring in silos. That's not the intent. They each inform each other in some way, and we're continually moving to kind of reach higher levels of coordination and integration among these activities. So this takes, interagency groups and consistent contact, obviously, so we can remain up to date on each other's activities. So that's one of the main reasons we are meeting today, really, just to get acquainted with all the projects going on over the next program year, where there are points of intersection and input, both federally mandated and otherwise, and then how to take advantage of them. Okay, so first, I'll generally kind of introduce you to the WIOA timeline of activities before touching on the reason for each and where we need input or feedback. And I'll also say here that this presentation is being recorded, and the PowerPoint and the timeline that we're going to look at of activities is going to be distributed to you after this meeting. And we're also going to be generating an FAQ as well from your questions if you put them in the chat box, since we don't know if we'll have a whole lot of time for questions today. But if you put them in the chat, we'll be able to actually put them in an FAQ that we can distribute or post as well. Okay, so now here we have the list of activities we'll be reviewing today. Some in more detail than others. These are all included on the timeline that we're going to view on the next slide. But this slide's probably better for your reference and easier to read. So each of these activities have certain benchmarks that we'll review, and we'll be able to get a general sense of which activities are taking place and when. Okay, so here we have the timeline of PY21 activities, kind of even getting into PY2022 activities as well, but we're going to be focusing on this current program year that just started this July. So I know it's not super easy to read, but I'm going to zoom in on certain activities throughout this presentation Again, explain the benchmarks, which are the gray boxes with the numbers in them. So each number simply means that this is the point of either the first, second, third, or fourth benchmark of the activity that's then explained beneath those colored bars. So you will also see lighter or darker colors on the timeline, which signify either local or state level activity. So local activity is the darker of the two colors, but the most important thing is to see where these activities are beginning and ending and where they intersect. And again, you'll receive a final version of this after today to keep on hand. But for now, just kind of focus on the basic colors. I'm going to give you very brief summaries of what these activities are, and then get into detail later. But you see the darker blue and darker orange towards the middle of the timeline there. These are two of the larger federally mandated projects, which a lot of you are familiar with. The blue showing the Unified State Plan modification, the Unified State Plan being that 4-year state strategy for the state's workforce system, its direction set by the IWIB. And then while in the orange, we have the WIOA annual statewide performance report narrative. That provides an opportunity for states to describe progress towards meeting their strategic vision and the goals for the workforce system. And this pertains mainly to Title I and Title III grantees, but all core partners participate and contribute to its development as needed. And then the light yellow and light orange at the top, that's the regional and local planning modification activities. Today we'll focus on the guidance that's going to be going out this fall for the modifications to these regional and local plans. Just as a general refresher, a regional plan is required to meet the purpose of 1, developing, 2, aligning, and then also integrating service delivery strategies and supporting the state's vision and strategic and operational goals. And then also coordinating resources among multiple local areas in the region. And then of course, WIOA requires a local workforce board in coordination with the chief elected officials to submit a local plan to the governor as well. And so we're going to touch on that too here. Okay, so we begin first with the Unified State Plan activities, focusing on the modification for 2022. You can see that we have started very preliminary work in the past few weeks, just kind of pinning down the tentative list of work group members and preparing for this presentation, really. And we're heading towards 2 benchmarks next year. We'll happily post the modified plan for public comment early next year before we complete the final benchmark of course, submitting the modified plan to the Department of Labor and Education around March of 2022. So those are the 2 big benchmarks coming up next year for the Unified State Plan. So each Unified State Plan is federally mandated to be updated after 2 years of it being instituted. So this means that 2022 is the year for Illinois' Unified State Plan to be modified. So the modification must update the economic and labor market analysis and strategies, which likely have changed since plans were submitted in spring of 2020. And then stakeholders such as the IWIB, required partners and business and workforce stakeholders, they also must be engaged in the process as well. And we have plans for that. So the Unified State Plan integrates input from several sectors of the workforce system, including, of course, the IWIB and the Unified State Plan work group and subcommittees, which include required partners and IWIB members and committee staff on those committees as well. We're also this year considering the possibility of splitting the subcommittee into smaller pods composed of those who are best positioned to update certain workforce strategy content. So for those of you who will be involved in the development of this content, these pods would reflect your content assignments for the Unified State Plan quarterly progress reports that we started this year. So this is a bit of a deviation from last year or the last time we went through this process in order for us to hopefully get people involved directly with the content that they are the expert on and ensure that all of our time and energy is well managed. And then we have other workforce stakeholders, including the business and labor community, as you can see there at the bottom of the second bullet point, local CEOs and LWIB staff, of course, the general public, community-based organizations, adult education providers, institutes of higher education, and any other stakeholders with an interest as well. So these are the groups that are going to be engaged through webinars and a survey as well this fall to get their input into the plan modification. So there we have the groups most involved with the modification process. Okay, so this slide here provides a brief overview of the tentative process that we've laid out that we'll be, of course, confirming after this presentation with the actual Unified State Plan Work Group and the IWIB. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize all of this here, but you can get here a general sense of the flow of development taking place from now until we submit the modification in March. The third box there showing that we are holding virtual engagement webinars and distributing a survey to gain insight from stakeholders on how to modify the plan, as I mentioned. We'll update the content required, post for public comment, submit to DOL. But now for an overview of how apprenticeship activities are integrating into planning processes, such as Unified State Plan development process, my colleague Bethany Yeager will take us through that right now.
Thank you, Cameron. I am Bethany Yeager, also with KEB. And the primary reason why so many others were invited to this meeting who are not typically participants in the IWIB committee chairs meeting is because this is an opportunity for everyone to hear the same thing and help orient those who are involved in any Apprenticeship Illinois activity in how they might be engaged in this Unified State Plan modification process, as well as other processes that will occur after the modification to the Unified State Plan. So there's three pieces of context that might be helpful for all of you to know, as well as those who are new to this meeting for purposes of listening to how Apprenticeship Illinois activities will interact with this Unified State Plan process. One is that we know with another round of NOFOs out just recently, apprenticeship is clearly expanding rapidly, and that's all part of a larger strategy to help the companies develop their talent pipelines. And that strategy and that priority is really made clear in the Governor's Executive Order 3, as well as the IWIB's Apprenticeship Illinois Committee's work plans and the existing Unified State Plan. So it is clearly a priority and expanding fast. So we view this this Unified State Plan modification process that's just beginning as an avenue to collect a lot of good information and potential for coordination of the activities and the outcomes of those activities that can then be featured in the Unified State Plan modification, as well as Cameron will mention the WIOA annual report that is due to the General Assembly and to the U.S. Department of Labor, and then also other reports to the Governor's Office or other agency executives just about the outcomes of what's going on in Apprenticeship Illinois activities. Cameron, next slide. So as this Unified State Plan modification process is just one way we are going to use to invite other organizations, such as state agencies, boards of education, and other community-based organizations, advocacy organizations, private businesses, business-led initiatives, all types of organizations. We're going to see if we can try to collect an inventory of the activities that might interact with Apprenticeship Illinois. And it's important so that we can possibly increase awareness among each other, as well as look for opportunities for collaboration. And then lastly, we really want to improve how we document both the activities and the outcomes in all the documents we talked about so far, the Unified State Plan, any modification to that plan, as well as other reports and the WIOA annual report looking at those outcomes. Next slide. So one of the first steps, which started this morning, has been in development, but this morning, those who were invited to this meeting in relation to the Apprenticeship Illinois efforts were sent an email by Candace Dickerson of NIU. She is the Apprenticeship Illinois project manager. She sent out an email this morning saying, we invite you to fill out this form so that we can create a profile of the activities that are going on right now. And that includes, yes, other state agencies besides the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, as well as the boards of education. so that we can start to build this inventory and understand the universe a little bit broader than we do now. This process of filling out this form, a very simple, basic step that shouldn't take very long, we're asking those who receive the form to fill it out by July 23rd. So that's 1 week from today. Then the Apprenticeship Illinois team will work together, compile it, create somewhat of a database and organizational chart so we can understand who the primary contacts are, what activities they're doing, and other important information that will just build out this inventory. And this is intended to be an annual process. So just this filling out a simple form will help make sure that the inventory is updated and that simple contact information is known so these connections can be made with little effort. So that's the process that's just beginning, and we look forward to really getting to know a little bit everyone a little bit better that's involved in the Apprenticeship Illinois activities. Cameron?
Thanks, Bethany. And as Bethany mentioned, Apprenticeship Illinois program profile updates and activities are integrated into the process pretty naturally, along with normal updates for the Unified State Plan modification due in March. So this kind of just looks at those points of input. This is probably among the most important of the slides here, is just to see exactly where we have identified points of input and collaboration among WIOA members. And of course, these processes are fluid and not fixed, so this can all be changed through feedback and input as well and be amended. But in July, of course, we have this webinar that's kind of the kickoff point. In September 2021, we have the review of planning processes with the IWIB. And then in December, we have a plan modification update during the winter meeting. And then March 2022, we have the briefing of plan modification as well, right before we submit to DOL. And among required partners and other stakeholders, we also have other points of input as well. Besides this webinar today, in October, we have a virtual roadshow soliciting input, and we got actually input from the Perkins strategic plan and how they went about their process as well, and other strategic plans, and how they developed their stakeholder engagement processes, so we can make sure that we have a really inclusive process as well. I did want to mention that. And then in November, we have a follow-up survey following up with the same people that we had in our virtual roadshow in October. And then in February, we have the last roadshow or webinar showing how the October webinar feedback influenced the modification, to kind of close the loop on that. And then we'll, of course, have our normal public comment period as well after that before we submit, where we get feedback from the general public or anyone who can provide it to us. So now we will transition to the second of the three main activities we're focused on today, the annual statewide performance report development. As you can see, this process is also kind of starting right now as well. Our first meeting tentatively scheduled for late July. And before I forget, I should mention that after this presentation, the latest on Monday, you'll be provided with some material to review prior to that first meeting for those of you that are on that annual report smaller committee. The two benchmarks we are working towards here are, of course, submission to the Department of Labor and then the Illinois General Assembly. And again, this annual report, this is a refresher. It's an opportunity for Illinois for us to describe our progress we made in program year 2020, which ended just a few weeks ago, towards meeting our strategic vision and, again, goals for the workforce system. It's important to keep in mind that, like many of these processes, they're taking place at the same time. So as an example, the Unified State Plan modification is taking place largely during the development of the annual report narrative, as you can see there on the timeline, and therefore these processes are integrated at points. For example, facets of the annual report may be included or at least inform the Unified State Plan development. Data gathered for the annual report is going to be informative for the modification, since those processes are taking place at the same time and using overlapping data in some cases. And the teams developing both the Unified State Plan modification and the annual report overlap in their membership. So you don't have to have these exact integration points memorized or anything. I just say that to emphasize that we are building towards greater integration of these development processes each time that we go through them. Okay, so now I'll touch on the requirements of the annual report. As a refresher, these 4 core elements and the other elements that are suggestions by DOL are responded to within the sections of the report that Illinois approves through our annual report committee and our integration input with the IWIB. So we include a description of waivers, developments in our performance in effectively serving employers. We talk about recent research and evaluation projects, and then get into how we are measuring customer satisfaction as well. So I won't go through all the suggested elements too here, but you can see on the screen at the bottom. But I would emphasize that in Illinois, we do make a point to respond to each of the elements that we can respond to make sure that we have a very comprehensive report responding to the requirements in TDOL 518. Okay, so as with the Unified State Plan, the annual report is developed in collaboration with the IWIB and required partners throughout the process. An annual report committee, as I mentioned, is composed of these individuals, and they develop the content and orientation of the report, which will again start this month, of course, within the structure provided by the federal requirements that we just went over. And this report will be developed over the next few months, starting with review of last year's report and this webinar to review the process. We'll develop the report outline and get the requisite input. We'll gather program success stories and other informational updates before compiling them into one report submitted to, again, DOL and the General Assembly. And then referring to the General Assembly report, we're sending an expanded version to them, which will include the local success stories and a few more explainer attachments. So this version is larger in part to focus on those local program successes. And that's sent in December. Okay, so here now we have our points of input for the annual report development. Some identified points of input in collaboration with the IWIB, and besides this webinar, include the August update of the confirmed process as data gathering begins. And then we also have a September presentation of the completed draft report that's also being planned. And then among required partners and other stakeholders, we of course have our 4 meetings through July and from July through September rather, where we get that input obviously on the development. It's very, very key. And again, KB will be sending out a draft work plan, and report outline, and agenda very soon for those of you that are on that committee, so we can go ahead and confirm that and start this process as soon as possible. Okay, so here we see the last of the 3 processes we'll focus on in detail today. And this is the regional and local planning modification coming up in 2022. It's shown in conjunction here with the MOU negotiations for PY21 and PY22. So you can see again how processes overlap. In this case, looking at 2022, the modified regional and local plans, as you can see there in the orangish bar, that's going to influence the MOU amendments in the green there that will be submitted next year. Since they're both being developed by local areas at the same time in spring 2022, and MOUs show how the plans, those local plans, are being activated locally. So it's just another example of how these processes intertwine, and it's you'll be able to reference this whenever you need to, because it will be sent to you in a finalized format too after this presentation. Okay, so the state's planning guidance sets requirements in alignment with federal final rule that each region and local plan must follow. As a refresher, there are 10 economic development regions that submit a regional plan, and within those economic development regions are 22 local workforce areas that submit a local plan. Both are reviewed by a state agency team. The last set of plans were submitted in 2020, so 2022 we'll see appropriate modifications to the plan. So just like with the Unified State Plan, these regional and local plans must go through a modification at the halfway point of their life cycle as well. And we are going to go ahead and release guidance this fall, as I mentioned earlier, to set the course for what the modifications to these local and regional plans should look like. Before the state can officially release this guidance, though, there is a review of the region local plans for areas of improvement, identification of language to update in the guidance, a state level review of the new language. We keep the IWIB, of course, informed of all of this, and then the guidance is distributed in the fall to give locals plenty of time to modify their plans. So the Equity Task Force has recently gotten approved an equity lens, as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, that will inform regional local planning guidance. That, again, is coming out this fall. This is especially important because we want to ensure that local partners are provided the high quality guidance from the state to inform descriptions of equity at the local level in their plan. So we really appreciate that equity lens to be able to use it to inform the guidance modifications. And then also we're going to update the IWIB Executive Committee about any probably minor language changes this fall as well. And then of course we have the state level required partner input through the state review of the plans before they are approved. Okay, so there are other WIOA activities included on the timeline taking place over the next year or two, including MOU negotiations, as we went over briefly, state level review of MOUs, and then other service delivery related activities, such as the one-stop operator procurement, one-stop certification, and all of these have their own timelines for renewal too, that I won't get into today just for the sake of time. But you can always email or ask if you have questions about these processes as well. But it's just good to understand that these are also going on, just to get an understanding of the context. Okay. So finally, the current IWIB strategic plan, that informs the upcoming WIOA activities we've been talking about today, all of them, especially the Unified State Plan. The IWIB will soon start the process of course, of developing a new strategic plan taking effect after the current plan ends in 2022. As you can see on the slide, updated bylaws will be approved by the end of the year, and the new plan will be in place starting in 2023. And as I talk about on the next slide, the other non-WIOA strategic planning concerning workforce and education are also important for upcoming WIOA activities as well to kind of set the context. So strategic plans and similar plans throughout the workforce education system in Illinois, they provide the contextual backdrop, I guess is a good way to put it, for the activities we've talked about briefly today. For example, the IWIB strategic plan, the governor's economic development plan, and then the Perkins 5 state plan informed the 2020 Unified State Plan. And for upcoming projects and activities, as you can see on this slide, the IWIB strategic plan is strongly guiding these processes, but other plans too, like the EOPD task force plan, Employment and Opportunity for People with Disabilities, Adult Education Advisory Council plan, and the Board of Higher Education strategic plans, they're all going to inform Unified State Plan modification, annual report, or other processes in some way too. So I just mentioned that just to iterate how important these plans are to these processes. Okay, so what are the immediate next steps most relevant to you all today? We get down to brass tacks for the annual statewide performance report. Our first meeting is coming up this month, as I said, and then we'll be providing an update to the IWIB next month about the process. Again, be on the lookout for some materials to review in the coming days if you're on that committee. And second, we have the Unified State Plan modification. Synopsis of the process is going to be reviewed in late August with the annual report committee and the Unified State Plan group, and then submitted to the IWIB. This will be followed by a stakeholder engagement webinar in the fall as well to inform how we update the plan. And finally, region local planning guidance is being updated this fall too, as I mentioned, and the IWIB is going to be receiving an update about what those more than likely minor changes to the guidance will look like. And again, just to reiterate, the plan is to use the equity lens developed by the Equity Task Force to inform any language updates to the guidance. And those are really your most important upcoming next steps. Keep an eye out for invites, agendas, and items for your review over the coming months, depending on which processes you're involved with. And we look forward to working with you all and using your input and feedback over the next program year.
Thank you, Cameron. Bethany,
Yeah.
we only have a couple of minutes left here, and before we go, are there any questions of IWIB members in particular, since this integration is really geared toward getting the IWIB actively involved in these processes?
I don't have, this is Renee. I just want to just flag in my mind that we do have that statewide rehabilitation council at DRS that is, usually part of the unified state plan. So I look forward to, I know that the invitations, more to come. We're super excited about it, but that's on my mind. Thanks.
This is Tom Wondorf. I'm one of the IWIB committee chairs, co-chairs, and wanted to know how the plan was to communicate or to extend invitations to the chairs, or that come by email or phone calls or text messages, or what do you plan to do?
Yeah, so I'm sure Amy can talk about this as well, but the plan is through Outlook invites to send out the invitations to the various meetings throughout these processes.
All right, well, we have hit the 12:30 mark. Thank you all.
We do have, Tom, we do have one question in the chat. Has there been any discussion about moving to a combined state plan?
So there has not been any discussion about that yet. We do begin each, so that would be in 2024. So we would begin those conversations very early in the process for the 2024 Unified State Plan. We have always decided on a unified state plan, but we always do open it up for discussion about whether a combined state plan would make more sense.
I would also add that their other plans are incorporated and referenced within the Unified State Plan. So even though the Unified State Plan is only specific and required to include the 4 core partners, program partners, the Unified State Plan expands and includes many other partners that are required, and it's an inclusive report.
Very good. So as these materials come out and are presented to you, in addition to the information that was presented today, any questions or comments that you have, please extend to Bethany and or Cameron. And Bethany's contact information is on the screen currently. Cameron, as you start getting these email invitations, his contact information will be included in those as well. We're a couple of minutes late. I'm not going to take any more of your time. It was an information-packed hour. Thank you very much for your attendance and your attention, and I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be in contact with one another soon. Thank you.